the way that I grew up was really, I still feel really grateful, but I also I'm at war at all times. There's a war going on that not everybody sees, and I see it from a really unique perspective. I experience it from a really unique perspective.
Come on, let's go. Welcome to the United Snakes, land of the thief, home of the slave.
The media, especially right now, the media is not dealing with me at all. This is the first interview I've had in a long time.
Smoke and mirrors, stripes and stars, stolen for the cross in the name of God. Bloodshed, genocide, rape and fraud, written to the pages of the law, good law.
I'm having some trouble again in my career for talking about Palestine. Like, I'm having very real trouble in my career for that. I hired a publicist. I paid a lot of money to a publicist, and they didn't get me one interview. And I don't have one festival booked this summer. And it's one thing for your career. My career's had a lot of highs and lows. So it's one thing to be like, this year you're on Coachella and Glastonbury, and then next year you're on like some local tiny festival.
Fist raised, but I must be insane, cause I can't figure single damn way to change.
But it's one thing to go to like zero, none. It means that you're outspoken for Palestine, and a lot of people in this industry don't like that.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to the MuslimCentric podcast. My guest is a very important artist who may not be widely known amongst Muslim circles, but he's a highly respected and successful hip-hop rapper and activist from America. Brother Ali has had numerous successful albums and performed on American late-night shows with Jimmy Fallon and Conan O'Brien. He has a close relationship with legendary rappers including Chuck D of Public Enemy, Rakim and KRS One. Brother Ali relocated to Istanbul, and that's where I went to interview him in Ramadan. He tells me about his roots, about growing up with albinism, about being welcomed by the black community, about his conversion to Islam at the age of 15, and also about being cancelled due to his outspokenness on issues such as Palestine. He's extremely honest in this interview, as he is on his own podcast called The Traveller's Podcast. He gives us a glimpse into the world of mainstream entertainment and the challenges faced by Muslims.
The bombs in the billions to rain on the children. The Holy Land built on mass graves, you feel it.
Brother Ali has just released a new album called Love and Service, and you must check it out. It's available on Spotify and other streaming platforms, as well as physical copies via his website, brotherali.com. There are also amazing videos on YouTube, and I must urge you to watch The Collapse, which is totally out of this world.
The rivers and seas hold the image, the tears on our cheeks and the beards hold the sweetest little ream. Yeah, Philistine repeated in our dreams. When the time turned timeless, the meek finally speak.
Unfortunately, his voice is being silenced and muffled by those who don't like what he says. This includes not being invited to festivals and other platforms which he has previously dominated. I hope you benefit from this interview, and I must urge everyone to support independent artists so that they continue to speak the truth. Just a reminder, if you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and podcast channels and leave a comment or 5 stars, as it helps us immensely. Please also sign up to my newsletter when the link is in the episode notes, where I give a behind-the-scenes glimpse into the interviews. But until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Ali.
Wa alaikum assalam.
How are you doing? Thank you so much for coming on to the MuslimCentric podcast.
Man, I'm a big fan of the podcast. I found out a bit about it because you were sending me clips. You've had some of my favorite people already. Yeah. And I was so much looking forward to it. And I'm just sitting here feeling terrible because I was over 2 hours late.
No, I think you have
today.
That. The creatives have that permission.
But see, that's the thing. It's like that we were saying before we turned the cameras on. Like, a lot of times, rappers and artists were just always floating in late, and I've always prided myself on. I used to be 15 minutes late for everything.
Okay.
It's just like a little mini rebellion that a lot of times artists do.
Yeah. Okay.
That's just like, I'll be there, but I'm going to be 15 minutes late because I'm not going to be there exactly on time. And then maybe about 5 years in or something like that, I realized that I was doing that, and I was like, I'm not even doing that. Yeah. But yeah, man, today was just, I did some really amateur Istanbul moves today. Yeah. Like, I tried to run around to different parts of the city today, and there's an election coming up, so the traffic was just crazy, and like each part of it, every stop I got later and later and later, so that by the time this was my last stop for today, and by the time we got here, it's just
No, it's
so thanks for being patient. You traveled so far. I didn't want to disrespect your time. I'm so sorry.
No, I appreciate taking the time to have a conversation, and I guess that's one of the things I was interested in. You've spoken a lot about moving to Istanbul, particularly from America, and we're here in Ramadan in Istanbul. I mean, what's kind of Ramadan in Istanbul? How has that been different than back home? And I think you've spoken in some of your podcasts around how it's been a challenge as well, kind of adjusting and moving. But you've been here for a few years, so kind of you kind of feel more embedded and local now in the local culture.
A little bit, yeah.
Habits.
Well, yeah. So one of the main things is that in America, we're the minority, Muslims, and so there's a lot of communal activity around Ramadan. And in Turkey, you know, everybody's Muslim, or they're a secularist, but I mean, even they're culturally Muslim. So people are with their families, and there aren't really. So for the Eid, for example, we live in Minnesota. We were from Minnesota, and there's a huge Somali population, you know, and my wife is Black, so my kids are brown. And you know, for Eid, we would get up and we would go to a Somali mosque to do the prayer outdoors. And then we would go to a certain breakfast place. And then we go to the Mall of America, which is the biggest indoor shopping mall in the United States. And there's literally an amusement park with roller coasters and rides and things in the center of it. And the Somali kids just take over the Mall of America. We call it the Mosque of America. They literally take over. So my kids, every year, that was a big tradition for us. We would go, and they're with other Black and brown Muslim kids running around, and the parents are all drinking coffee, and then you can go and you take your kids to the movies, and you can go and buy their gifts, and you know, there's communal things to do. Here, everybody's with their family. There's nothing communal to do on Eid. Like, you get up and you go to the prayer, but ladies don't usually go to the Eid prayer. Ladies don't usually go to Jummah. It's just a different, like, one of the main things that I realized is that in the West, the center of life is money. So having a job means you're the most important. Whoever makes the money is the boss. It's all centered around money. And so that's why the fight for equality for women is like, we also want the right to have money. And so the idea of being at home, like you're kind of like relegated to the home, and you do chores. In most other places in the world, the center of life is the family and is the home. And so women are the leaders of the home. And so they're the leaders of real life. And men going out to work, that's like doing chores. You know what I mean? It's like, yo, you go get on a motorcycle and deliver water for a few hours and bring back the money so that we can go do your little job and then come back. The center of life is home. So it's just a different relationship with the masjid even. Like, there's an area for women to pray, but when women go to the masjid, it's to get away and get a break from home. Whereas for men are out, you know, it's just a very different relationship. So for Ramadan, for example, it's really great to be able to pray, to have a masjid everywhere. The Turks do a really quick tarawih. Like, the standard is they do 20 rak'ah, but they will do Isha, 20 rak'ah, and then 3 rak'ahs of witr in a half hour. Like, you're literally like, it's like doing burpees. Like, it's really quick. But every neighborhood has a mosque where you can go and they'll read the full juzah in the night. And that's like a 2-hour thing. And then also there's a family that we know. There's like a hafiz in our neighborhood, like the Western guy. And so you can also go to his house and they'll do it there too. Mm-hmm. So the religious part is amazing, but, and also the culture. So me and my wife are both converts. And what I've discovered is that the parents can be all about Islam, but for the kids, if they grow up in a culture that's not like that, it's just like, Islam is this thing my parents are really into. And maybe they identify with it, maybe they don't, you know. And And so the culture of going to the masjid even, is kind of like, that's a place we go, and there's, but so for my older kids, Islam is really me and my wife's thing. They're Muslim, but my younger kids are growing up here. And for them, like, Islam is this big, beautiful, awesome thing. It literally is the dopest place you can go is to the masjid. When you go to the mosque, everybody loves kids. I mean, Turks in general love children. And like, children are like public property almost. Like, people will pick up your kids and feed them and take pictures with them and pick them up and walk around. And so you just have to get used to that. But so the main thing, and then also the school they go to, the two little ones are both girls. So for them, they're just around this culture of really strong, really just solid, sane, healthy culture. And the women they're around are really just amazing women, and it's all ages. Yeah. So they've got Quran teachers that are in their 20s all the way up to in their 70s. I don't think Turks know how sane and healthy their culture is, because they do have stuff they argue over, and like, they'll get out in traffic and like yell at each other and pretend they're going to fight and things like that. But it's like, we shoot each other. We kill each other. In America, we just kill each other, like, all the time. Like, people kill each other. Like, the people can't understand. The police will kill you. If you get in an argument in traffic and you get out of your car, you might die. There's a really good chance you'll get shot and killed. Your children might get shot in school. Your children are really, I'm sorry for saying this, it's like trigger warning for people, but you probably know what I'm going to say now, but the likelihood of your children being sexually violated by the time they're adults is higher than anywhere else in the world. I mean, in Turkey, like, people would never consider such a thing. Like, we put our children in a car with a grown man, our daughters with a grown man that, like, I don't know his last name. I don't know. I really don't know much about this man. And he might drive a little crazy, but they would never occur to these people to violate a child like that. Yeah. So it's definitely an adjustment. People don't speak English really. I mean, some people speak English, but the majority of Turks don't speak it. But that's part of why they're so sane, because they don't have a lot of Western influence. Like, Turkish people listen to Turkish music. As a rule, you can find people that listen to K-pop or American music or something like that. But for the most part, if you're around Turkish people, they're listening to Turkish music. They're watching. They have amazing Turkish television and movies. It's a full. They don't need anybody. They don't need the West, and they're not impressed that you're from America. Like, if you go to Saudi Arabia, they're like, "Oh, he's Ameriki." Like, it's like you're a VIP if you're from America. At least it used to be like that. Yeah. Turks don't care. It's just like, okay, fine. What do you need? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like,
so what's your relationship with America like now when you sit and see what's going on there? And I mean, how do you feel that relationship is with America? Because some of your music itself has, you're obviously embedded with the social justice and, speaking up for the oppressed as well. So when you see what's going on in America, and especially the polarization and everything, how do you where do you think things are going, and are you just glad you're here and away from all of that? Or
yeah, it's really I mean, I was raised by oppressed people. I was raised by Black families and communities, and obviously I became Muslim when I was 15. And so I've always been really connected. So my wife is Black and Puerto Rican. So also like Puerto Rico is part of America, but people don't treat Puerto Rico like they're part of America. So they almost have basically an immigrant kind of story. And so, and then my fans and the people that listen to my music are like poor and working class people. So it's like, on the one hand, like, I feel very, very connected to the people that I love. And it's very strange. There's this weird thing where, like, we got out of it, but we still feel connected. And you almost feel there's a conflict there where there's like a type of privilege of being able to leave. And it's not privilege. It's not financial privilege. Like, I think sometimes people have said to me, like in the comments and stuff, well, not everyone's a rich rapper that can just move to it. Like, man, we moved here, it was the pandemic and we were broke. Like, we had almost no money when we moved here. It's part of why we moved here. And I was part of a scene. The musicians in Minneapolis all were canceled collectively in that time period as well. We also had the uprising in like the George Floyd, what they call riots, but you know, like there was mass protests. A lot of our neighborhood was burned down. All this was happening when we left. And we wanted to come to Istanbul at some point anyway, either Istanbul or West Africa. We were going to move to one of the two places. And so we wanted to leave anyway. But really our privilege is not so much financial. It's just that me and my wife are both entrepreneurs and we both believe that you can do what you, it's a privilege of perspective and worldview, that you don't have to live in America and you don't have to go to college and you don't have to work at a job and you don't have to work for somebody and you don't have to do like just what the things that everybody does. The biggest privilege is that. Yeah.
And because there's quite a lot of even Brits and Europeans that have moved to Istanbul over the last few years, as well as Americans. So this diaspora, what do you think is their kind of long-term vision? Do you think they're here to stay, or do you think at some point, you know, it's just a step on their journey and they're going to go back? And what's your kind of vibe from the people that have, you know, moved to Istanbul? Because Istanbul's obviously been that real hub between the East and the West, hasn't it?
Yeah. I think a lot. So we came here saying like, let's go to Istanbul for a year. And then by the time we were here for 3 months, it was like, why it's so difficult to come here. It's a waste to do it just for a year. So I think sometimes people think about being semi-transient, but I think that most people would like to stay here. Yeah. Most Westerners would like to stay here, but it's very difficult. So the country is really divided, mostly secular and religious. It's more complicated than that, but the secularists a lot of times are nationalists that, unfortunately, sometimes the worst of that side of things. It's not everybody, but the worst of them can be xenophobic even, and so they want to send the Afghans home. They want to send the Syrians home. You know, they feel like, you know, refugees are coming and they're sucking away resources. And then for the Western immigrants, I don't like the term expat. Like, we're just Western immigrants. We're immigrants like everybody else. But so for the Western immigrants that come and the dollar or the pound or, you know, the kroner or wherever people are coming from is more powerful than the lira at this moment, they feel, the nationalists feel like we are elevating the prices, we're causing inflation and things like that. But in any case, there's half this country doesn't want us to be here. So every year you apply for another year, and if you don't work for a big organization, or if you don't spend $500,000 to buy a property, and we're not doing either one of those, every year you're just considered a tourist. In their mind, they're like, there's no reason for you you're just hanging out here. And like, no, I rent an apartment. My children go to private school. I pay a lot of money for that. I rent an office. I do work here. I'm taking money from my country and spending it here. I have my whole life here. But every year they could reject us and they don't need a reason. So the only reason that we don't feel totally settled is just because it's almost impossible to get permanency. Yeah. Like we just last Ramadan, we bought 2 things to put on the walls. But up until then, we basically just had beds and a couch from IKEA, and that's it. Like, we just never, because it's like any year they could just say, no, you're done. And then you have 10 days to get out of the country.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
So it's, you don't feel that, you know, that setting your roots down and establish yourself, it becomes really difficult as somebody like that. So that's fascinating to hear your experiences, Brother Ali, and I'd like to go back to the beginning a little bit just to see what got you from there to here. And before we do that, one of the things I've always found fascinating is how honest and authentic you've been in your your music, but also your podcasts. And where does that come from? Because I think, is that something that comes easy to you, in the sense that, you know, you're very honest about your life, your difficulties, your challenges, the ups and downs. And how important has that been for you to just be as authentic as you can? Because especially people that are in the public light, you know, there's usually the public side and the private side, and that can sometimes be a conflict. So has it become easy to you to be so?
Well, first of all, bless you for your good opinion. You know, there's always stuff that we're hiding, and there's always, you know, we're always editing on some kind of level. You know, like my last episode of my podcast, I was just really frustrated, and I felt really bad, honestly, like putting that out. And like people checked on me, like I've heard from people I haven't heard from in a couple of years. Say, hey, I heard the new episode, are you okay? Mainly talking about, like, I'm having some trouble again in my career for talking about Palestine. Like, I'm having very real trouble in my career for that. And but so I think for me it comes from the fact that so I'm albino and partially blind. And there's confusion about albinism in general. There are people that think that albinos are black. Black people and white people think that. And Africans do have a higher percentage of albinism, like 4 or 5 times more than anybody else. But there's albinos in every culture, in every ethnicity, in every, you know. And so my parents are white. I was treated really harshly when I was a kid, and it was black people that taught me how to live life from the time I was 5, 6, 7 years old. And so I also, my family had some dysfunction and things like that, and I really just gravitated towards the people that were caring for me and teaching me and training me and stuff. So culturally, I've always had a closeness with black culture that I didn't have with white culture. And so the main thing that I learned is that I don't know how other people see me. I don't understand it. I don't know it. Sometimes people think I'm their teacher, like their religious teacher. And unless we started our relationship like that, I won't even realize it. Like, there are people that I find out are like really embarrassed to tell me something because they look up to me like a teacher, like a religious leader. And like, I didn't even know that you saw me that way. I don't know when women like me. Like, if women are attracted to me, my wife always has to tell me. She's like, oh, she likes you, by the way. And I'm just like, oh.
And why do you find those kind of, is it just difficult to pick up those cues because of your visually?
The vision, but also, like, I've never known what people think of me. Like, I don't know if people think I'm white or black. I never know unless somebody says something, you know. So I've been in situations with police where they'll be stopping me and bothering me, and I'm like, oh. And then they'll say on the thing, like, 6 foot black male, 250 pounds, you know, this thing. And they give the description. I'm like, okay. Or somebody will say, yeah, we want you to come be on this panel. You know, it's for black entrepreneurs. I'm like, hey, just so you know, I'm not ethnically black. You should probably have a black person. You know what I mean? Yeah. My friend Yasin Bey, the rapper, like one of the greatest of all time. I love him so much. He came and visited one time. He was like, what's it like being black here? And I was like, you gotta ask black people. He was cracking up. But yeah, you know, so I think, like, I've never known how other people are perceiving me. And I know that I cannot make somebody think something. I can't control how people see me. So I'm like, the best is to just be sincere. That's always disarming for people. And it's always, then I at least have an idea for I do know if I vibe with people or not. I don't know what they think, but I know if we're vibing or if we're not. Okay. And people either really vibe with me or really don't.
Okay. And so what was it like growing up, like, you know, when you were younger, in terms of your early years when you're in school, and what was the household like? What was your kind of upbringing like?
Yeah, it was really fun and really infuriating. So I went back and forth between these two worlds, between the black world and the white world. And America is really very different. Like, if you're black in America, is very different from being white. And it's not that only that one is good and the other one is bad, but, you know, on the one hand, white people, these are huge generalizations, which are always not true of everybody. But I found white people and white culture to be really kind of cold and robotic, to be very detached from feeling, from soul and spirit, from meaning. You know, the only real emotion that white people experience together is anger. Like collective anger is like white people do that as a group. Even sporting events, it's like kill them, get them. You know what I mean? There's like, it's like only anger is the only, and the only time it's different is when they're engaging Black culture and when they're drinking and doing drugs. So like white people are really detached from their own kind of like human sense of life. But it's taken for granted that they're human and they're safe. So white people can mess up, not only physically safe, but like socially and culturally safe. You can be mediocre. You can be kind of a like whack person, and it's going to be fine if you're white. It's just going to be assumed like, hey, people are people and everyone. You're just assumed that you're a full human being all the time. So you're physically safe, you're economically safe, you're, you know, and not even that you'll be rich. Most white people aren't rich. So when you talk about privilege, most people just think of the area where they're not privileged. So if you say privilege, most white people think, well, what are you talking about? I'm not rich. We're like, oh, you don't even realize all the ways that you're just safe to be a crappy person because you're white, and it's just going to be understood that you're human. Whereas in Black culture and families and communities and groups and relationships and friendships, people are very, very human. And the full spectrum of humanity. Like, you know, it doesn't mean that everybody's like, you know, this like wise old grandmother from a movie or something like that. But people are very, very human. And, you know, and so there's a certain like spiritual and human and psychological and soulful and emotional freedom there that's not in the white world. But in every structural sense and every like is just danger. You know what I mean? If like even from within families, it's like families have been abused for so long that most people are abused from within their family, but it's just like centuries of psychological, emotional, physical, sexual, financial abuse of every kind, every possible thing that every harm that a society and structure can, and government and on every level, institutions and everything, every harm that can be done has been done to Black people for hundreds of years in America, you know? So it's like the way that I grew up was really, I still feel really grateful, but I also I'm at war at all times. There's a war going on that not everybody sees, and I see it from a really unique perspective. I experience it from a really unique perspective. My parents identified as liberal, progressive white people. But the fact that they had a son, so like me and my wife come from Black culture. Our children are growing up in Turkey. Our children don't like our food. Like they eat yogurt and they are Turks in a lot of ways. And we just have to respect, like, this is how you're growing up. Yeah. So like they might not like our favorite music. They might not like our favorite foods. They relate differently to things, you know? But for my parents, it was similar. My parents grew up in white America, and I was being raised in Black culture in the 90s. There was gangs, there was the crack epidemic. I spoke different language than them. I didn't. And so I was in these dangerous situations. And so they were progressive and liberal, but then their son was in dangerous situations. And I saw things about them that to me were glaringly racist that they didn't see about themselves.
So was there a lot of conflict growing up then?
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah.
A lot.
Okay.
Yeah. And then when I became a Muslim, At first, they were happy about it because that was like one of the ways of being black in America, where it was very, you get your life together. And it's like good for you. It's good. It's like objectively good. No matter what you think about Islam, if you live in those environments and you become Muslim, you're automatically, you get up in the morning, you're clean, you're sober, you're not doing crime. At first they were like, oh, thank God. Maybe this will get him back to being white. He'll start just by being safe and sober, and this will get him back to being white. And so at first they liked it. And then when I married my first wife and had kids and stuff like that, then they were just like, well, we lost him. But then they both came back to a certain different degrees. They also both died pretty young, both my parents.
Okay. And were they religious? Was there religion in the household?
We went to a church that we went to a church off and on, but it was a very kind of like nondescript, like it wasn't a strong identity. It was just one of the things that nice people do is go to church sometimes.
So were you because you converted at quite a young age, at the age of 15. Mm-hmm. So were you quite a reflective child? Were you thinking a lot? Were you kind of absorbing? What sort of kid were you?
I mean, I've always known Allah. I've always known God. I've always had a very, very personal relationship with God my whole life. I've never...
What's the earliest
always
age you can remember?
That's not even a memory. Like I've always talked directly to God, like always. In good moments, bad moments, you know what I mean? I remember as a little kid, like being afraid and just knowing like God's always here. You know what I mean? And I remember, but I've always been like that. Alhamdulillah. And that's a gift. Like, it's not a claim. That's not it's just a gift. I have teachers. I have like Muslim teachers that were atheists at one point, and they're able to help me talk to people about Islam better because they know that feeling, Mm-hmm. But yeah, I've always been I always loved art, and I always loved religion, and I always loved culture, and I always loved spiritual things and cultural things. And
were you kind of exploring other faiths and religions before you converted?
I thought I was going to, because I knew that when I was younger, Christianity was fine. Like, I didn't believe in that specifically. I loved God. And I felt like, well, these people are talking about God, and sure, that's fine. I never really believed it or didn't believe it. It just kind of was, it's fine. Like, if you're hungry and there's food, it's fine. You don't need it to be anything in particular. But then once in hip hop in the mid and late 80s, that's when KRS One and Chuck D and all these people, KRS One especially, was saying things about religion that really, and he wasn't trying to get anybody to be part of any particular religion, but he would say things like, Christianity was formed hundreds of years after Christ. And, these people changed the Bible. And anything I know is that truth can always be questioned. Truth can always be questioned. He repeated that on this one thing where he's just talking. One thing I know. Truth can always be questioned. And it's like, yeah, man. So, like, I know Christians that are close with Allah. Like, I know that. I don't question it. Like, I don't agree with their theology, but it's not that, But then once I started to ask questions of Christianity, it's like, I can't believe this. And there are people that do, and I respect their faith enough that I couldn't say I'm a Christian if I don't believe it. And then when I was 13, I met KRS One, and he was telling all of us, but he told me specifically I should read the autobiography of Malcolm X. So I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, and I was like, oh, this is everything in one person. Everything that I love about art, culture. I mean, he was a dancer. He knew all the jazz musicians. He was in the street. He did everything. And then when he became Muslim, I also knew enough to know that no matter how close I am with Black people, closeness to Black people is not Black, and it's not the Black experience. And so I was like, okay, being a Muslim seems to be just for black people. That's what I thought from reading the book. So I was like, I respect that. I'm not going to try to, I'll just live, I'll be my own version, but from an outside perspective. I'll believe what they believe and I'll do what they do. I'm not allowed to be one. I thought it was like, if you watch the movie The Irishman,
Yep.
you know what I mean? When he's like, Crazy Joe Gallo is talking to Russ and he's like, we're brothers, we're all brothers. And the Irishman is like, you guys are brothers. I'm not, but you are. You know what I mean? Or like always in Scorsese movies, there's always an Irish guy that's not allowed to be in the mob because he's not Sicilian. But he's part of it. Yeah. And it's like Tom, the adopted brother in The Godfather. Like he can be the consigliere. Like you're down with us, but you're not part of us. Yeah. That's how I always felt with black culture. Like I'm here and because of their goodness, I get to be here, but I'm not black. So, I thought that's how Islam was. Yeah. And then at the end, when Malcolm goes to Mecca, and then eventually, this is before the internet, eventually I saw a videotape at the library of Malcolm giving a speech when he came back, and he said, I met people in the Muslim world that would be called white in America, but they weren't white. They just had lighter skin. And they had blue eyes and stuff, but he said they're human beings. And he said if the white people in America, if the people in America who calls himself, the man in America who calls himself white, would study Islam, it might give him the chance to be human again. And I was just like, oh, okay, then I'm Muslim, period. Like this, just simple as that.
Because I kind of echo or mirror kind of your experience because I think we're at the same age. And so obviously very different experiences. But I remember... my first kind of bought a Public Enemy cassette tape and it was 91, The Enemy Strikes Black.
Okay.
And the bit that always stood out for me was there's obviously I'm born and brought up as a Muslim, was the mention of Allah and about Islam. And you didn't think, you thought Chuck D, you don't know what, didn't know all the background and about the nation and everything, but you just heard that kind of something you could relate to. Mm-hmm. And I think those kind of really pivotal in those kind of late 80s or 90s because the hip-hop scene, especially globally, was kind of really expanding and even I guess Malcolm X was, because I remember going buying the autobiographies. It was a really pivotal time, and I think I can totally understand where you're kind of coming from in terms of your experiences of that as well.
Yeah.
And so how did that then lead to the conversion to decide, okay, was it an individual or was it...
Well, so I didn't learn the whole story until later, but I just started saying I was Muslim, but I didn't know what Islam was or how to be a Muslim. So I just had this kind of like this like buffet of everything that was available to me. So I knew some 5%ers. So, I mean, you know this already, but for the people that don't, you basically had like so many of the people in Africans that were enslaved, especially from West Africa, that were brought to America were Muslim because they came from places like Senegal and Gambia and other places that a lot of the population was Muslim. And you had people come and try to teach Islam to the formerly enslaved people, but it was very difficult to do. And so some of the first that broke through, Dr. Sherman Jackson calls them proto-Islamic movements. For people that are still in those organizations, they would probably take exception to that because they feel like this is Islam. But to be fair, I mean, they also know in the Nation of Islam, the Moorish Science Temple, the 5%ers, and certain other groups, like they know that their language and theology and some of the practices aren't the same as the global Muslim population. They would describe, I've heard it described as, you're going up a hill, you're going up a mountain, and the mountain is Islam. And the rest of the Muslim world is going up one side of the mountain and African Americans are going up another side. And so there's a different experience and there's different navigation and things like that. But so within this like kind of world of Black Islam, there's a kind of a variety. And so I was getting stuff from all of those sources. So the 5%ers, there were also Salafis at that time. Tablighi Jamaat was big in in Minnesota at that time, and this is the early 90s. You know, and then I went to the library at school, and they had a Koran, like a Koran, like it was all English. And I saw the people on the front, and I was like, they look Chinese. Like, why are there Chinese people on the front? And now I know they were Turks. Like, it was an Ottoman like style thing. But it was just this wide variety of stuff, and I just sounded crazy to my parents because, like, the Nation of Islam theology, like I said, there's stuff in there that's you don't find in the rest of the global Muslim community. So the idea that white people were actually created by a mad scientist on an island over the course of several hundred years. It was actually like grafted and bred. That's how white people became white. This is according to Nation of Islam theology. And that there's a mother ship, a mother plane that's going to one day come, and all these things. And then also, but I also was saying some things from traditional Islam that I was learning. And then some of it was, and I remember having an argument with my mother, and she was like, there's no way that what you're saying is a global religion. There's no way that 1 billion people believe what you're saying to me. So she drove me by the mosque one day, and she was like, hey, what is that? That says Islamic mosque something. She's like, I think there might be Muslims in there. And I was like, oh yeah. She was like, have you ever been there? I was like, no. She was like, would you ever want to go there? And I was like, yes, I want to go there. And so she said, well, if you want, I could find out when they meet. And so she took me there one day on a Sunday. They had what they call ta'aleem, which is just like basic Islamic education. She drove me, and she let me think it was my idea to go there. Yeah. But she had already talked to them and found out that they were Sunni Muslims, and, so I went there just only a couple of times, and I said my shahada just maybe 2 weeks or something.
So what was your mom trying? Had she come around then to the idea of, well, let me support him now of whatever he wants to do? Or
she knew enough to know that she wasn't going to change my mind about anything. So I think in her mind, she's like, let me try to steer him towards the best version of whatever he's doing. And so that was her way of.
But I think it's fascinating to hear these everyone's own kind of story. And I remember Dave Chappelle's talking about the pizza shop, some guys, and interviewed Preacher Moss recently, and he turned up at the wrong mosque. He thought he was gonna. Dude, when this is the funniest story.
Yeah, so he thought he was gonna. Yeah, join the Nation of Islam.
He goes, the guy was in prison, had told him go to that mosque, but he was about 10 years too late. So I think everyone's kind of Allah guides you in different ways.
He went for Jummah, and he said, "This must be casual Friday." Dude, amazing. The preach is so funny. And Chappelle, one of the things Chappelle doesn't say is that his brother, so he has a brother named Abdullah, and you can find footage of him online. But Abdullah was the first one in their family to convert to Islam. Okay. And then the whole family converted. Their father and their mother, I don't think were together anymore, but they each separately also both converted. And so Abdullah Chappelle is the one that, but yeah, then Dave had to have his own experiences.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Man.
And so what was that kind of experience? You've spoken a bit about, as a convert Muslim, the experience for you and your wife. And this is an area that's, I think, again, something we're still grappling with a lot, in particularly in the Western countries as well. How do we kind of cater for the needs of convert Muslims? And I think it's something that is, I think we've not cracked that yet in terms of as Muslim communities, because I think it can be something that's quite lonely and quite isolating for a number of Muslims, if they're not supporting their families and trying to navigate this whole shift. What do you think we should be doing as communities to kind of help people that come to Islam? Because despite everything, we're seeing more and more, obviously, people drawn to Islam and becoming Muslims. And there's that initial kind of elation and that high, and you take your shahada, but the real work happens after that. And how well are the community that's supporting, convert Muslims, and, particularly ones that are native to those countries?
Yeah. Well, so for me, when I converted, I was already, by the time I was 15, I had already been kind of immersed in Black culture for 10 years, like my whole kind of like, since I knew myself. And so when I converted in Imam Warathdin Muhammad's community, I mean, that was a really vibrant, fully functioning, all Black community. And we were really isolated, but we were totally fine. Like, we didn't need anything from anybody. So we came from the Nation of Islam, and we really felt like we were here to build our own nation. Even Imam Warathdin Muhammad, Allah be pleased with him, have mercy on him, you know, he said, we're here to build model communities. He had this concept called New Africa. And, you know, the idea that we're going to show the whole world how to be Muslim in this context. And so, and I mean, we had him as the source of our Islamic knowledge and wisdom and guidance, our Islamic guidance. And he did encourage us to study, but most of us didn't study outside of him. And he was self-taught. Imam Warathdin Muhammad was self-taught. So he never had teachers. He had an Arabic teacher who I think was Lebanese, named Dr. Jamil Diab. But other than that, completely self-taught. And, you know, and so we were self-taught too. And we were totally fine with that. And to be honest, if the Imam were still alive, that's how I would still be probably. I didn't feel the need to study something else until later, until he passed away. And a couple years after he passed away, I found myself really lost. And so I made Hajj. And then after that, I started looking for teachers. And that's when I came across kind of what they call like the neo-traditionalists in the West. So Imam Zaid Shakir, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, Dr. Omar Farouk Abdullah, Abdul Hakim Murad, Dr. Sherman Jackson, on and on, you know what I mean?
Amazing lights for the,
yeah,
particularly in the 90s, wasn't it? When
See, I didn't know about them in the 90s.
Oh, was it late
Hilarious
on?
story. Okay, so the last time that, one of the biggest days of my life was, I think it was like 2005. My last time actually seeing Imam Warathdin Muhammad in life, in the dunya. I've seen him in dreams after that.
Really?
But yeah, and I remember him, and I really remember like his eyes and his hands, and like, it's so good to be with your teachers. Yeah. And
was it quite a close, direct relationship? Would you
we weren't close in the sense that like we didn't talk a lot or anything like that, but he always remembered me. And he always went out of his way to show me and everybody else that I was really that he cared about me. And so like I would be sitting several times, like we used to have all kind of meetings with him. Some were very formal, some were more informal. But twice we were sitting in formal situations where I was at a table and he came on to speak. And before he spoke, he would come and greet me and hug me, you know. And so I saw him in 2005. And he would always ask about me and things like that. And he would sometimes teach with movies. So he would recommend, he loved movies. And so he would recommend movies. And so he would say, you should go see this and tell me what you think. But in 2005, I had just met my current wife, my now wife. And this one day, it was my last time seeing the Imam, and by this time I had a rap career. And so Dr. Rami Neshashibi, who runs Iman in Chicago, one of our greatest leaders of this time, Dr. Rami Neshashibi is the man. He's the so great. So he introduced me to the Imam, and he knew that I was in Imam Muhammad's community and identified with that, but I don't think he knew that we had known each other. So he said, Imam Muhammad, I want to introduce you. This is one of our famous rappers, you know, so-and-so. And Imam Muhammad goes, him? He said, that ain't no rapper. That's my boy. That's my man. And so we hugged and everything. And then he met my wife, and my wife wasn't Muslim yet. She decided to become Muslim that day. So that's the last time I saw Imam Warathdin Muhammad alive. And it's the day that I met Dr. Omar Farouk Abdullah, who became my primary teacher. Not that any of my mistakes or anything bad about me can't be attributed to either one of those people. Those are all me. They've given me the advice, and I'm just slow to learn. But those are the guys that have been like my... Also, that's the day that Imam Warathdin Muhammad met Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. They had never met before 2005.
Oh my gosh.
And Dr. Rami introduced them and said, Imam Muhammad, I want you to meet Hamza Yusuf. Imam Muhammad turns to Hamza Yusuf. I didn't hear this conversation. Dr. Rami can tell it. But Imam Worthy Muhammad says to Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, I like your music. He thought it was Yusuf Islam. He thought it was Cat Stevens. He's like, oh, who's this? Who's this? Oh, this is a handsome white man. You know what I mean? Assalamu alaikum, brother. I love your music. Didn't even know who Hamza Yusuf was. Like, we didn't even know. We didn't know. We knew Imam Zayd. Because everybody loves Imam Zayd. Like, Imam Zayd is respected universally. The Nation of Islam, the Salafis, the Deobandis, like, everybody loves Imam Zayd. So we knew Imam Zayd. But I didn't know any of these people. I didn't know who Hamza Yusuf was.
Did Sheikh Hamza play along and start singing Peace Train or something like that?
No, but there's actually a photo of that moment.
Really?
Yeah, there's a photo of the moment.
Wow.
Where and like video, you don't hear it, but you see it happening. You just see Sheikh Hamza turn to Dr. Rami and just like, what? He thinks seriously, he thinks I'm... Yeah.
I remember
these people are so amazing.
They're amazing, mashallah.
Yeah.
Because I remember the clip on YouTube I was watching of Imam Zayd, and he was talking about Imam Worthy Muhammad and how almost we need to study that whole community and a lot more, and almost is perhaps one of the largest kind of mass conversions of
one of the
Muslims,
largest in Islamic history, where it wasn't like a government it wasn't like a group of people taking bay'ah with the caliphate. It's just a group of people inspired. And so when you say like, what do we do to help the converts and to help one of the things that I see from having this like lens of like what white supremacist colonialism has done to everybody is, and I don't, I'm seeing this as an observer. The Pakistanis and the Arabs and the everybody else, they need the converts as much as the converts need them. But they just don't realize it because they're black, most of them. Like if the converts had been white, it would have been a very different relationship. It would have, and I didn't realize that our Pakistani Arab family are also oppressed people who have been colonized and have internalized white supremacy, internalized self-hate, internalized all of this stuff. I didn't realize that because I'm so used to people that are oppressed being poor. And so these like really affluent like Pakistanis from like the suburbs of Chicago that like spend $10,000 to go to these retreats with the sheikh and things like that. I didn't like those people too much until I witnessed one of their like inner community problems. And I was like, oh, you guys are oppressed too. You just have money. So I didn't know you were oppressed, and maybe you don't even know you're oppressed.
There's still very much that colonial mindset, particularly from the subcontinent, and
everybody's got it.
It's still the same.
There's not an inch on this planet where white supremacy has not become dominant. It hasn't been dominant for a long time, including on the African continent. And so the thing is that, so when you say like, okay, so on the one hand, like hip hop, so everybody goes to black culture for meaning. Everybody, because there aren't really there's not, in the West, there is no other culture. There's no music that's not black music. There's no comedy. Everything is all black. Like all the cultural stuff is black. And so that's what people go to attach to meaning on a spiritual level. But also we have a low view of culture and art in the West. Even the people that say music is haram, they don't actually mean all music is haram. They mean black music is haram. Because nobody says the drum is haram. And nobody says that it's haram to sing or even rap. Tala al-badru alayna. Is that haram or halal? That's halal. The conversation is around, okay, certain instruments, there's certain scholarly debates around that. And some of the most hardcore scholars of all time, like Imam al-Ghazali is seen as like the Sufi sheikh. And he is, but he's terrifying. Like if you really read what he's saying about the reality of haram, and he takes it very seriously. He says that music has a role for a spiritual person. If a person has love as part of their deen. For people whose deen is only outward, then like music has to be haram for them, because for them, like music ignites the love and what's in the person's heart. And so if your religious expression is only outward and you're a literalist and you know what I mean, then like your religion, love isn't part of your religion. So you still love, you just don't love religiously. You know what I mean? Because you say like, oh, those people worship graves and those people do all this stuff. I mean, sorry, this is like some sectarian stuff. I'm not weighing it. I'm not saying any of that. But Imam al-Ghazali is saying that like for people that are literalists and say that the Sufis and the lovers who like love is part of their practice of Islam. So the Maulid, for example, it's not a religious practice. It's a cultural practice of love that is seen as part of the religion, but it's not ibadah. It's only a bid'ah if it's ibadah. If you don't see it as ibadah, if you see it as my culture is also part of my deen, you know what I mean? It's not governed. It's not necessarily, sanctioned by the Sharia, but within it there are things that are sanctioned or not. You know what I mean? So anyway, he basically is saying like for people who love as part of their religion, they need music. And they might need to move to the music. You know what I mean? So, yeah. So I'm sorry, but what I'm trying to say is that the Muslims need each other. And what Dr. Omar Farouk Abdullah writes about Islam and the cultural imperative is like, that's what really, when Muslims are able to build authentic culture in a place, that's when Islam becomes solidified in that place. And so for the people that just say music is haram, it's like, okay, all the Muslims who believe that but still make music, their music is very violent. Because they're like, well, this is haram anyway. You know what I mean? So it's like, okay, what about Yasin Bey's album, The Ecstatic? You know what I mean? You're going to say that that's just as haram as, any other music? You know what I mean? And so anybody that is musical, anybody that does have, some of us are just musical. That's a reality. Like there are kids that just sing. There are old, like grandmothers and aunties that just sing. And so like everyone's going to be singing something. There's nobody that lives a music-less life. I don't care who you are. Everybody is humming the beat to something. So like, where's that going to come from? Yeah. If we just have music as haram, so.
Because you started rapping and singing it from the age of 8 or something, wasn't it? And so from very young. I mean, was there ever that conflict when you became Muslim or afterwards? That did people say to you, "You're gonna have to leave the music industry. You're gonna have to"? No.
Imam Warthi Muhammad, the last time I saw him, yeah. So he said to me, because that was the first time my music ever came up directly, and he said, "I like your rap." He was an elder. So like, they didn't say like, I like your music or he's like, I like your rap. He's like, you rap and I like your rap. He's like, I don't like all the words you're saying. And I used to curse a lot in my music when I first came out. And, he said, I just don't like all the words. He said, you have really beautiful ideas and you're using ugly words to describe beautiful things. And so I told him my reasoning at that time. And he was so wise with how he did everything. He just said, well, okay. He said, okay. He said, well, you're the expert, not me. I don't know rap like you know it. And he said, and also, you're a Muslim. And he's like, and you know when you're in your Islamic character and when you're not. And I can't tell you that. He was like, no one can tell you that. But you know it. And he said, and Allah knows it. Yeah. And I'm just like, oh, because in some ways that was so merciful. Like he really let me off the hook in that conversation. But he left me with a personal conversation that will never be quiet. Because he's like, oh, this is between you and Allah. And you know what's what. And also anybody else can see the difference. You can see when somebody is just being arrogant or when somebody. And then I met a friend from LA who became a really dear friend of mine. His name is Evidence. The first time I met him, he was cracking up laughing. And he's like, you're a conscious rapper that curses more than a gangster rapper. But it's because you don't smoke weed and you don't drink and you don't chase women. He was like, you live like a monk by hip hop standards. Compared to my teachers, like I'm a bumbling idiot. But by hip hop standards, he's like, you're a monk. So he's like, you curse more than everybody else. You're overcompensating. You're trying to let everybody know how, you know. And he's like, someday you're just going to stop. And he's kind of right. Like at some point I just stop doing it.
And what is, I mean, you've obviously, you know, a lot of people in the industry, both music and entertainment and stuff, and a lot of prominent Muslims, you know, and is there that conflict between their religious kind of pull in one way and, you know, how they perform? And so I guess it's trying to, what is the flip side of, you know, we have Muslim artists who perhaps do things which conventional Muslims would say, that's not what, you know, the etiquettes that we would do, whether it's the cursing or certain things. I mean, how do we understand the flip side? Because it's very easy for us, as you know, the example you gave, somebody to be critical of somebody and just say, oh, that's wrong, they can't be doing that.
Yeah.
But there's a flip side to that as well, and there's a reason. So how do we kind of understand what's going on the other side for people that aren't in that kind of zone?
Well, there's a lot of conflict. And, you know, but the dunya is conflict. Like that's what the dunya is. It's full of contradictions and conflicts and things like that. And I'm not saying that to excuse anything. I'm not saying, the dunya is conflict. And so, you know what I mean? So that means that we don't have to, I'm saying if we have the opinion that music is not categorically haram, and that there is music that's not only halal, because halal covers things that are morally neutral, you know what I mean? Things that are mubah, you know, and those things are a waste of time. It also covers things that are makruh, that are like that like God and anybody righteous would be really offended by. You know, and it also covers things that are virtuous and things that are, you know, mandub, mustahab, and things that are wajib, or, you know. So there's a wide spectrum there. And so also we have to know that there are certain things, and Imam al-Ghazali points that out. There are things that are haram in music. And music, you have to be really, really very, very careful with it, both listening to it, making it, because it's such a gateway to the heart. And like when we listen to music, we subject our hearts to whatever we're listening to. And that thing does have an impact. And anybody that says they love music, that's why. So none of us can have it both ways. Like the people that do believe that music can be virtuous and can be good, it's that way because of how powerful it is. And so we have to be really careful and we have to be wise with it. And also Imam al-Ghazali said that for the overwhelming majority of people, they should not do it for a career. They shouldn't try to be public musicians. And so somebody he tells a story in that same chapter about music and the whirling dance and things like that. He says, the student comes to the sheikh and says, I want to be a musician publicly. And the sheikh says, fast for 3 days and nights, don't even eat at night. And then come back to me before you eat anything. So the person, 3 days and nights, no eating, doesn't drink, eat anything, comes back famished and says, I've done what you said. It says, okay, what's your favorite food? Like, what's the meal that you want more than anything else? And so the person says whatever it is. And so the teacher says to the people, like, bring so-and-so. So he orders it, he sets it in front of him, and he says, would you rather eat or would you rather sing in this moment? Because if you'd rather eat, then you're a person that's still you are governed by your appetites, by your worldly appetites. Because if you'd rather eat, then all of your singing, all that stuff is just going to be for you to get attention and money and fame and power and accolades and props and for you to be famous. If you'd rather sing right now, then that shows that for you, it's not about this stuff. It's something from deep within you. And so those are the only people that should be singing publicly. So it's like, it's only for the samurai. It's only publicly. I think everybody should sing at home. I think everybody should, and everybody does. All these people can say whatever they want. You sing something. Like you have something that you sing. So there's conflict in it. And we should also, if we're going to say that there is music that's okay, we have to be really careful about what we do. And then also, the conflict is also there in every profession. You know what I mean? So like if somebody is in sales, there are people that sleep with each other in sales, and there are people that go get drunk together in sales, and there are people that you do better in your company if you go drink with the people in your company. And it's the same in hip hop. Like the fact that even some of the Muslim artists, I was just in a place and there was a Muslim artist there who's a dedicated Muslim. He's very serious. We were in the same city, and we didn't see each other. And he was like, man, I just wasn't in a place where I wanted you to see me. You know what I mean? Because I became Muslim before I ever really got exposed to substances. Okay. So it's not a struggle for me. And I actually asked, I know a lot of scholars, and I don't know why, but also the scholars that think music is haram, they know music, and some of them are hip hop heads. And like, they don't listen anymore, but one of them, and I ask people their opinions, even when I know they differ from mine. Almost especially when I know they differ from mine. There was a very, very prominent, serious scholar, hardcore guy that came through Istanbul, and we went to Jummah together, and then afterwards I said, listen, man, I know what you feel. And I asked him about one of my Muslim friends. I asked him about Yasin, because Yasin Bey has some conflict sometimes, because he loves Allah. He loves Islam. He loves the Muslims. I mean, he loves Islam more than anything in the world. Like, that man is... That's one of the best Muslims I know. Really. Yeah, he's a really very, very special person. And he's conflicted sometimes. And we talk about it. And so I was asking this scholar, and I said, because I know he believes that music is haram in general. And I asked him, I said, what do you think? I said, and he knows who Yasin is. I don't think they know each other. But I'm like, we talk about this all the time. And he said, look, man, he said, if I put my fiqh hat on as a faqih, as a qadi, I am of the opinion that those certain instruments are haram, that he was like, not all music is haram. He's like, even, but performing in these mixed gendered spaces, women performing for men, stringed instruments, wind instruments, those are the kind of like groupings of it, anything with wind and strings. And there's a lot of very serious. Also, if we don't have the opinion that music's haram, we have to at least acknowledge that there is very strong evidence for those instruments being things to be really careful about. It's very strong. There are hadith about those instruments that are authentic, no doubt about it. But people that know fiqh know that a hadith is not a fatwa. It's not a ruling in and of itself. You know what I mean? And the people that say that, they're a specific madhab that tell you don't believe in madhabs. But that is a madhab. That is a type of usul. Yeah. So he said, with that hat on, I just have to tell you what I believe is the stronger opinion. So he's like, so a lot of what you guys do, even though you're sampling, because I'm like, well, what's the ruling on sampling? He's like, well, you're playing a record and you're rapping along with the record. If that record has strings and wind instruments in it, that record is haram. So it's haram to play it, and it's haram to sample it, and it's haram. You know what I mean? So I'm like, what about synthesizers? I'm like, what about trap music? Because that's synthesized sound. And he's like, well, that hasn't been discussed. But he was like, most of that stuff is still going to be. So he was like, the drums are going to be halal, but a lot of the synthesized sounds, they're emulating strings and wind instruments. I'm like, okay, yeah, all right. I get that. But he said, but if I take that hat off and I put on my civilization hat, a lot of the great Islamic civilizations, like the South Asian culture, is built, civilization is built around stringed instruments. You know what I mean? The Muslims were the best at the sitar. The Hindus have it now, but the Muslims were the ones that perfected it and really gave it to the world. And then the Turks are built, like the Turkish Islamic culture is built on the ney flute. And like Rumi's whole thing is like so he's like, there's also like civilization building also does happen around culture. And then he said, and then he was like, also in the tasawwuf realm, there's a group of people who like, in the day of judgment, a lot of people that are in the fire that aren't there permanently. That's not their final abode. There are people, and some are Muslims, because you can't go to the garden dirty. So if Allah doesn't forgive you and you have to be purified, you do that in the fire. May Allah protect us from that. But there are Muslims that are in the fire and then they're out pretty quickly, because the Prophet ﷺ does sujood and he doesn't raise his head until all the Muslims are out of the fire, until all the sincere Muslims are out of the fire. May we be sincere. The hypocrites, nobody can do anything for them. And may we never be from them. But, you know, and then people are just brought out of the fire group by group by group by group by group. And this man said, when it seems like no one else is going to be brought out, Imam al-Ghazali said that if somebody even acknowledges a higher power and they just show any respect to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, even if they just use the phrase Prophet Muhammad, even if they just say that those people will be brought out because of their respect for the Messenger of Allah. So he said the final group are people who saw something from Islam and just had a good opinion of it. They're just like, oh, the hijab is pretty. Or like, oh, that adhan thing sounds nice. Or that Quran relaxed me one time. Or that, you know what I mean? Or like, yeah, their gardens are pretty. Or their buildings are nice. Or anything that those people are brought out of the... He's like, so the people that are publicly Muslim have a big role. Because he's like, imagine depriving somebody of that. So anybody seeing Yasin Bey, and like, because he's such a public believer. Like if you, the people of Allah are the people that remind you of Allah just when you look at them. Everybody knows about this man, that he loves his mom and he's Muslim. That's what everybody knows. Just like Muhammad Ali. They know that he's very impressed with himself and he's Muslim. That's what everybody knows about him. So like anybody that's like, man, Muhammad Ali is a great man. Shh, they're out of the, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And so that kind of, you've mentioned in one of your podcasts, I think the only people, or the people that are closest to you that you totally relate to is Yasin Bey and Amr Suleiman.
As artists.
As artists, yeah. And, you know, going back to your career, like when you know, sort of rapping from a young age and you then, you know, achieved a, you know, degree of success and fame and celebrity, and you know you're appearing on, you know, late shows, and
that was a pretty quick period.
Yeah, so that was
they pulled the plug on that. I had like 2 years like that.
So you were, because I was looking at your age, you were about 30, 32, and you know, you go on the Late Show and with Jimmy Fallon and things like that. So
that was the last one. Conan O'Brien was the first one.
You're in the real, you know, spotlight at that point. What was that like? And then how did you kind of then, you know, what is your reflection of the industry and Muslims in that whole industry? Not just music per se, but in entertainment, because there are many Muslims in that space. And I think, what kind of impact does that have on your faith and being in that? And did you feel, I have to get out of there before I get sucked in too much? And you see people, you know, Yasin Bey's moved away and Dave Chappelle had moved away. You know, at pivotal moments, you've seen that, you know, pattern of that sometimes, where people are saying, well, I've seen the industry for what it is and I need to, you know.
So most of us aren't actually at home there. And so we don't choose to enter and we don't choose to leave. The overwhelming majority of people, even independent artists. So of all the independent hip hop artists I know one person that actually chose not to be in the industry, and that's Atmosphere, Slug from Atmosphere. He was offered all of it and he turned it down. Rick Rubin tried to produce their album, and MTV, and like they wanted him to be in the limelight and he chose not to be. The rest of us were just trying to be in the limelight, and the industry kind of just courts you for a little. Like there's a period where the industry, they see promise in you and then they just kind of try you out to see, they court you. And for me, I was never going to be at home there. I didn't know, like when it was happening, I was fine with it, but it wasn't everything to me, because I like Atmosphere are my like musical kind of like mentors. And so I saw them do it, and it didn't really feel like it changed anything in real life for them. Like for me, I was always looking at them as like, it's really about our listeners. Like, do our listeners still connect with us? Because because our whole movement was based around that. So the industry kind of found us interesting for a while, and then they just stopped for almost everybody in my whole. There's a few people, so LP and Killer Mike, Run the Jewels, they became big. They became successful. And then there's other people that like grew up watching us, but they weren't necessarily from our cohort. So like Mac Miller and people like that grew up watching us. But they also watched other things too. It's not just us. But so I didn't really choose it. And then Yasin Bey, they really wanted him to be a movie star. They really wanted him to be. Those are the only two people I know that chose not, that had the opportunity to really be in the industry and chose not to be. You know, and Dave left and then he came back and now he does it on his own terms. You know what I mean? But he's still back though. He's still back in the public eye. Yasin does not want to be famous. He doesn't want to be known. He wants to be in the community and he wants to be able to live his life and make his art and things like that. That man has no desire to be, you know, he doesn't care about money. He makes money.
Yeah.
But I mean, he just spends it and gives it away and you know what I mean?
People joke nobody knows where he is. He keeps a low profile.
Yeah.
You know, he's up in some African country or something.
Yeah, man.
But
so those two guys are the ones that I saw that had the opportunity to stay and make their home there, and they chose not to. Yeah. For me, it was just never a real fit. It was never.
But when you're in that kind of whole domain and having, you know, being recognized and being a public profile, and you have to be. How did you kind of manage your nuffs and your kind of that real ego pull? Because, you know, that's a real, you know, the draw in that, especially in the entertainment industry, because everybody loves you and everyone's, you know, a piece of you and temptations are everywhere. How do you stay rooted? How do you kind of stay, well, actually, I'm not going to, you know, sacrifice what I think is important for.
Well, I did lose my mind a little bit in the very beginning, like the first year, and I made a deal with myself, not a verbal one, and what I learned later is actually a deal with Shaitan. So like once you start really looking at the spiritual path and just observing it. The people that really travel the spiritual path, like the murids, like the people that are like around the true Sufis, not the people that whatever, but like the true Sufis. Those people basically say that the beginning of what they do is not what people think of. When people think of Sufism, they think of dancing and eating a lot of food and wearing oud and wearing expensive clothes and things like that. And like, that's the opposite of Sufism. Those people like Sufism because they like the best of everything. They're like, well, I'm wearing tailored suits and I have the most expensive beads and I drive the best car and I have this so-and-so. Like, that's just spiritual. What did Micah Anderson say? And I think he got it from somewhere, but Micah Anderson from Tatlif said spiritual materialism. Like, you can be materialistic about your spiritual stuff, you know? And that's what I'm saying. You can spend $10,000 and go have some one-on-one time with the sheikh. Not that money doesn't go to him, but there's an industry around. It's weird business, man. But the real Sufis are on some like, I am going to dedicate my life to only being the best, most sincere Muslim in every moment. And it's war. And what they say is that most of us are making a deal with Shaitan. I'll only go so far in the religion and then you leave me alone. I won't step on your toes, you don't step on my toes. And until you be around people like that, like, and I've known some people that I think are true Sufis. It's a small handful of them, but there are people that are like, oh, this person it's every face they make. It's even in the inclinations of their heart. Like, you can try to kill them and they will be up at night praying for you. There literally is nothing, because they don't need anything from anyone other than Allah. Like, they literally, it's like, you can't hurt their feelings. You can't offend them. You can't do anything to them, because like, they just are only for God at every moment. And like, I've seen people try to bribe those people. I sat one time in this man's house, and this like rich guy came, and he was doing the spiritual materialism thing, gave him 10,000 British pounds. And this is in a very poor country. I won't say where because that would be revealing who the person is. But we're in a very, very, very poor country. And he gave the money to the sheikh, and he was like, this isn't for the community. This isn't to build a new thing. This is just a personal gift for you. And the sheikh just goes, oh. And he was like, oh, let's have food. And so he starts. Now, I had been there for a week at this point. Suddenly, I just see all these locals that I had seen at different parts of the week. They're all coming, and the sheikh is just saying, excuse me just a second, I just have to greet somebody. And so he's going back and forth in other rooms and things like that. The sheikh's cousin drove me home and said, what do you think happened to that money? I said, man, I already know. He said he gave it all away. He wouldn't go to sleep until it was gone. You know what I mean? This man could have bought, with like 10,000 British pounds, he could have built a new house. He could have 2 more wives by the end of the day. Like, he could have done so many things with that. Yeah. And he's just like, oh. He says, and the man said, this is just a gift for you. I just want you to be okay. And, you know, but anyway, so my first year, I didn't realize that I was making a deal. That I was like, okay, for me, I'm going to, because prior to that, I was an imam before that. And so I was like, okay, I'm probably not going to pray every day. I'm going to be in a lot of crazy situations.
You see what you were an imam before?
Before I started touring, yeah. So from the time I was like 19 and through my early 20s, I was an imam at Masjid An-Nur, at that.
Okay.
Like, we moved to a new location. I helped build it with my hands. It's the same place that Keith Ellison, it's the same mosque that he goes to. Khalid El-Amin is a basketball star that also prays there. His family is actually the administrators of that mosque. A bunch of other like prominent Muslims in Minnesota. Like, that's the black mosque in Minneapolis, in Minnesota. And like, I gave the inaugural khutbah there. I was like a full-time, I wasn't the resident imam, but I was one of the imams, and I was the one that was full-time employee. So when I was 19, I married people, I buried people, I did shahadas, I did counseling. I had only been married 2 years, and I was counseling like grown people. I was, helping people with their divorces, all kind of stuff. Like, I was an imam. And so a few years later, I'm on tour. I'm the only Muslim around me. And I mean, everything that you imagine is happening in front of my eyes. And it happened overnight. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to lose some of myself for a minute here. Like, I'm probably not going to pray the way I was. I'm going to be in all kind of crazy situations. But I'm also, I was like, and nobody was helping me. Nobody was there with me when this is going on. It's just me trying to figure it out. So I was in a lot of situations in that first year. But I basically said to myself, for me, being a Muslim and making it through this period is going to mean I'm not going to smoke or drink anything, and I'm not going to have strange women in my bed. That's what it's going to be for me to be Muslim. And in that world, people were like, yo, Brother Ali is a real, like I said, I was a monk in that world. Yeah. Like, one of the guys was not happy with the fact that I wouldn't do intoxicants or have sex with fans. And he was on a campaign to try to get me to do it, because he felt so terrible about the fact that he did it. And so he told me one time, he was like, it's part of the job. Like, this is just part of the job.
And is it an expectation to do these things to progress if you want to be successful, or do you think it's
not that direct? It's not the Illuminati. Like, I don't know anything about Illuminati. It's not like that. Yeah. It's just that you make everybody else uncomfortable. Yeah. Like,
if you don't fit in, then
it's just like, and that's why I say it's just like working at the post office, or working in an ad agency, or working if everybody else does, or working at the police office.
You'll be seen as different, and so the opportunity.
Yes, Serpico didn't take the money, and they had to kill him. They tried to kill him. You know what I mean? Yeah. The guy in Training Day wouldn't take the money, and so they almost killed him for it. It's like that. I've never experienced an Illuminati thing, although one time I went to like a Hollywood party kind of thing, and I was like, whoa, this is next level. It was at this like big house that they rented. And so I went upstairs to a bedroom and I locked myself in the bedroom and I just waited until, and they had a big bathtub and I just took a bath and prayed. And yeah, this was like, man, and they kind of, I think they forgot I was there.
Okay.
And it was before Uber and all that kind of stuff. So then in the morning, like not long after Fajr, like I just stayed up till Fajr and I was just like, I'm praying every prayer today. Yeah. And then I just walked until I found cabs. And then, but yeah. But so it's not like, it's just that you make other people uncomfortable because for them, having sex is part of it. And for them, you have all this, even if you're not very famous, like just the fact, like if you're on stage in front of 30 people, there is somebody there that's seeing that as powerful and they want to be part of that. It's an experience for you to talk and everybody listen. And there are people that want to be part of that. And so
there's power, isn't it? It's a power dynamic, isn't it? That you have in different domains, but also there, you have an audience and fans and
yeah. And I've seen it, but like I said, I'm friends with a lot of scholars and like they have it too.
Yeah.
And they have it from observant religious women that are just like the combination of he's saying something that my soul needs, which is what an artist does. And then also he seems to be the expert. You know what I mean? So if he's doing the thing I want to do and he seems like the expert, I can progress in it. Yeah. But then also everyone's looking at him and everyone brings him what he wants and everybody. And if I'm his partner or if I'm involved with him in some kind of intimate way, then I'm in the inner circle and part of that electricity is rubbing off on me. I'm part of it, which is why people don't leave R. Kelly. And which is why people don't, because like R. Kelly has a power. There's a power to being famous and charismatic and rich and, and then also you're watching him sing and it's a genuine gift from God. And so if you leave R. Kelly, you're not getting that energy anywhere else. And that's why people stay. And I've also seen teachers who weren't what people think they are. And it's the same thing. People just want to be around that,
And do you think clearly, there's that kind of divergence from, as you said, your Muslim beliefs and behaving in a certain way or what you would do and not do and whether you're accepted in those kind of areas. But also with that being albino and with your vision, does that set you apart as well, or has that even been less of an issue?
I don't know. I don't know. That's what I'm saying. I don't know. When people don't vibe with me, I don't know why. And when people vibe with me, I don't necessarily know why. I do know. So one of the things where being a Muslim helped me is that when I first started touring, the artists who were aligned with Islam in various ways, they chose me to open up for them and go on tour with them, and they made music with me. And but it's like, is that because I'm Muslim? Or is that because we just genuinely vibe with each other? But like all of the most like conscious, pro-Black, militant Muslim aligned. So, I mean, me and Chuck D are dear friends. But I mean, Brand Nubian took me on tour. Lord Jamar from Brand Nubian is the one that said white people are guests in the house of hip hop and they ought to be respectful. And people really were up in arms about that. You know what I mean? And during that time, I'm like, he took me on tour, and he, to this day, he actually tweeted during that time. He's like, hey, for the record, I love Brother Ali. He said, me and Ari the Rugged Man. He's like, I love Brother Ali and Ari the Rugged Man. He's like, I love those dudes. Those dudes know how to be good guests, So, but I think being Muslim has something to do with that. Rakim took me on tour for a full year, for 2 different tours.
And in terms of, do you ever feel...
Wu-Tang Clan?
Masha, you've done a lot. In terms of, I don't know how you would describe your own kind of the physical manifestations, I guess, with it being albino, and your tag is Brother Ali is blind, is your visual impairments. How do you reconcile that side of your life, and have you does that do you struggle with that, and I'm fascinated by the idea of, clearly, when you're younger, we all want belonging. We all want to fit into the crowd when you're, in school and as a teenager. And anything that sets us apart can be a bit of a struggle. But despite that, the industry that you're in, there's a confidence to going up on stage, despite what other people might see as these limitations. So I'd be fascinated to hear how you kind of, see that whole relationship with yourself in terms of that, what Allah has blessed you with and how other people, but you, as you said, you're not sure how other people are perceiving it, but how do you kind of feel that? And in a way, where did that confidence come from? And becoming a performer, was that part of you just needing to be heard as well? And what's your kind of reflections on the relationship between these two?
You said a lot. And it's like everything else in the dunya, like it's double-sided. Like everything in the dunya is double-sided. You know what I mean? And that's where like real wisdom comes from. Because everything, like Allah says about khamr, like about alcohol, He says there's good in it and there's harm in it, but the harm outweighs the good. And anytime a person gets fooled into doing something harmful, we're just focusing on what's good about it. So we can trick ourselves into thinking it, because there's good in everything. And there's you can find something good about anything. And so yeah, I think like with my physical stuff, the both looking different and having limitations with sight and stuff like that, it's by overall, like it's a huge blessing. It's a huge gift. Huge, because it really contributed to allowing me to have my own perspective on life and on myself and on just everything. Because I've never fit in anywhere. But also then when I do fit in with somebody, I believe it's genuine. Like when I really connect with anybody, it feels genuine to me, because of the fact that like, I'm not just part of your team. You don't have to accept me, and yeah, the confidence of being on stage, like I definitely made music about it and I tried to make it a positive and things like that. And I think that there are those people that feel like, especially when I started, it was just like, man, there's this albino guy and he raps and it's crazy. And like, so that was definitely a help. The flip side is that I also, and I didn't really uncover this until the last few years and going to therapy, but I also have lived most of my life with a very, very deep sense of lack of self-worth. Like not thinking that I had any intrinsic like worth or value or was deserving of any good. And it just I've had a lot of really dysfunctional relationships because of it. Relationships where I couldn't really have a genuine partnership with anybody, because on some level, without realizing it, I didn't think I was worthy of a true friendship. So a lot of my even really good relationships were me like elevating people to unrealistic heights and needing to see them as above me. And I saw their relationship with me as charity towards me. And so my job was to just give everything because I should be grateful that they're even here. And so that led to a lot of relationships that weren't sustainable, and because when things get difficult, that's when like Louis C.K., the comedian, said, he got canceled, and he was like, when something like that happens, you learn who your true friends are. He's like, you don't want to know who your true friends are. And he said, it's never the people you wish it was. You know what I mean? But yeah, I mean, so, you're asking also about the relationship with fame. And fame's such a relative thing. And like, I know Dave Chappelle. So it's like, that's one of the most famous men on earth. You know what I mean? I know Chuck D. I know like plenty of people that can't leave their house without everybody knowing who they are. And I was like that in Minneapolis. I've never been like that everywhere, but in Minneapolis for a good 15 or 20 years, I couldn't leave my house without somebody saying something and like trembling or crying or like something. So I did have that experience for a long time. And then the whole music scene got canceled in 2020. So, and I lost it. Like when I go back there now, it's not like that anymore. And I don't know if it's because of that or what it is. Because around that same time, the record label I was with stopped doing they had the biggest hip hop festival in America was in Minneapolis of all places. And they had a record store and like all this stuff that they were very, very present in the community. During the COVID, they stopped doing the festival. They closed the store. They don't have the presence they used to have. I didn't perform there for many years. And then everybody was just saying that the musicians are all, and was like saying it because they were saying the musicians are bad people that are harmful abusers and all this kind of stuff. And there is a lot of abuse. Obviously, there is a lot of abuse. But nobody ever said that I did those things, but also nobody ever said, Brother Ali's not canceled. So I had the experience of really genuinely being a celebrity in that city anyways, and then losing it.
And that's a grieving process in itself, isn't it? When you lose
the community part was the grief, and the relationship. The fame part, it made me realize, mashallah, I don't give a damn. I don't.
You didn't miss that.
No, I don't care.
Does that not feed into that self-worth bit though? Because when people are stopping in the street, that gives you
because that's either genuine or it's not.
Yeah.
So if like I do know when I could genuinely connect with somebody. So like if somebody thinks I'm famous and that's why they want to talk to me, I that never landed in me at all. I'm just like whatever.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If a more famous person was here, you'd talk to them instead. Like I never was holding that. But when somebody was like, that thing you said about your dad dying of suicide, you know what I mean? Those things, because that's a real connection. That's not fame. That's being an artist, and that's connecting soul. That's human beings really connecting. So that part doesn't go away. But the part that hurt me was that, and it doesn't hurt anymore, but the part that hurt me for a long time was that the community, no one in the community ever was like, you don't mean Ali though, right? Nobody said that. Not one person was like, but what about all the good that this guy has done? Or what about like these issues that we're talking about? He's been talking about this stuff his whole career. Like they were talking about things that happen with women. And first of all, I've been married my whole career. You know what I mean? But then on top of that, so like there's not a woman, you know what I mean? And the things that they're talking about, it's like, those have been key issues. Like I've talked about those issues my whole career. So like you guys are all late talking about things that I've been talking about. And my wife is a therapist that like helps. My wife is a survivor and is a therapist that like helps women with this stuff. So like the fact that nobody said that, that part hurt at first. And then I just realized, you know, even with that, it's like, man, you can't have that expectation.
But it hurts when it's people closest to you.
Yeah.
You know,
when there's people who could have said something that would have really, there are women specifically, you know what I mean? There's a woman on that first tour, the tour where I lost my mind. And not completely, but I'm saying the tour where it was just like, what the, you have to adjust to anything new. I'm saying some people go to Al-Azhar and they lose their mind. You know what I mean? Like any new situation, you got to figure out, who am I now that I'm in this different, you know? There was a woman who's a well-known activist, and she's from Minneapolis. I didn't know her. My DJ, somebody I know knew her. And she came to a show and she was like studying somewhere else. And I don't even remember this. She reminded me. She was like, I had too much to drink or something that night. And she's like, you guys took me to your hotel room and you had 2 beds in your hotel room. You guys put me in that bed, and then you guys, one of you slept in the bed and the other slept on the floor, and you guys just protected me. Nobody touched me. You know what I mean? And I don't remember that one. I know that there's been other situations like that, but that's what I'm saying. As a Muslim, you're not supposed to be in that situation. But like, I know that there are times like that, and there are people that could have said like, hey, I don't know what did or didn't happen with anybody else, but I know that in the specific way you guys are saying that artists are bad to women, that guy actually protected me when I was in that situation. But there's a huge spiritual lesson in all of that. Like like we have our two outward enemies and we got our two inward enemies, and knowing your enemy is so important. Like, you know what I'm saying? So like internally we have our ego and our appetites, you know, and those things are our enemies. They have to be disciplined. You just got to beat up on them.
And part of dealing with these difficult times, you've spoken about having therapy or being in therapy. What, especially men are not good at talking about things and reaching out, particularly middle-aged men, and we know, you know, all the kind of the consequences of that as well. Yeah. And you've been, again, very authentic and open about therapy and encouraging people to do that as well. What's it meant for you, and why do you think it's so important? What for people that aren't familiar? I mean, I'm a psychiatrist, so I know therapy and everything like that to some extent. But for you, what does, you know, for people that don't know this, you know, what role can therapy play, and why can it be helpful for people?
Well, I think there are certain realities in the modern world that are abnormal, and so there are certain prescriptions that we have that traditional people wouldn't have needed. So I think that if we lived with our extended families, which would be natural, if we lived with our tribe or our clan, which would be natural. Like we go to Africa, in West Africa, everybody has compounds, and like the people's sleeping quarters are all together, and like you're always seeing your aunts and your grandmother and your dad's other wives and your siblings and your cousins, and there's animals, and there's like you live with a real community, and there's no real secrets. Everybody knows if you're getting along with your wife. Everyone knows if something happens to you. Everybody basically knows what's going on, and so you're always, first of all, being seen as you actually are by somebody. Whereas like the isolation of our lives, we just have so many secrets. Nobody really sees us. Like we all walk around with the burden of so many secrets. And not that we reveal our sins to each other necessarily, but like we all just have so many experiences that nobody knows but us. And we can't really see ourselves. We have to be in space and be a community, and then also just benefiting from the wisdom of other people and how they view us, you know? So for me, like there were so many things that I've always thought, but until I was in therapy, I never said out loud. And there are so many questions that nobody ever asked me, and things I didn't realize. Like I had these resentments with all these people that I thought like I was just a good friend to that person. I poured into them. I was so generous with them. And then when it was, and they didn't give me what I needed. And so my first day with a therapist, I said, I just broke off a lot of relationships. And she said, how did you feel when they don't do? How do you feel when they don't do what you want them to do or expect them to do? I was like, I feel hurt. And I was like, I feel invalidated. She's like, oh. So if they're not operating in a relationship, you feel invalidated. So when they are, and I was like, oh, I was being validated by them. Oh, I didn't realize that. Like, so I'm seeking validation from another person. Can another person ever validate you? No. So in my mind, I'm thinking these unexamined
making
thoughts.
These connections then.
Yeah. That like the second a person just asks questions, and she didn't say, here's your, like people, I mean, maybe you do too. My wife, as a therapist, hates watching TV and movies where there's therapy. Because she's like, that's not what it's like. Like The Sopranos or something, like that's not what it's like. Here are the secrets about you. No, they just ask you questions mostly and get you to think about, and there are many different styles and approaches and things. But for me, what I always benefit from is people asking me questions that just make me think about things in ways I hadn't thought about them before, and just get out of the constant narrative and loop of.
And what do you think is the main thing you've learned about yourself and about your personality and how your mind works and how your emotions are? Both with therapy, but also with time.
I mean, I think that the main thing about therapy is that we get the opportunity to see ourselves and learn things that we think that we didn't realize we think. Like we have thought patterns that are just unexamined because of the fact that we don't really share our lives with people. You know what I mean? Like sometimes when you're in when you're in really, really close, like real cultural situations, like it's one thing to visit somebody's city. It's another thing to like live with the people of a culture, because they'll say things and do things that sometimes you think are rude. Like in like modern Western like society, we would think certain things are rude. But like when people really just share life all the time with each other, they just tell each other their observations. You know what I mean? So like a person younger than you will say to you like, you know, you always eat before the elders. Why do you do that? That's weird. You know what I mean? And you'd be like, oh, I didn't even realize when I was eating with relation to when the elders were eating. I never even realized that. And of course you can say like, no, I don't. But like you learn about yourself from other people observing you so much. Like when it's kind of like having a best friend, or, you know, just the fact that we're so isolated means that we don't get a chance to really see ourselves. And so we hide things not only from other people, we hide things from ourselves. And therapy just gives us a chance to see ourselves in a way that we're probably not going to get to on our own.
How would you describe your personality, or how would your friends and family describe you?
Oh man. Yeah. Well, I'm in a state right now where I'm just like hyper aware of my ego. So every Ramadan is different. I'm sure, you know what I mean? There's all these realities, like they're always all at play, but there's like certain ones that each Ramadan is like, oh man, this is so real to me right now. You know what I mean? Yeah. The one of them that I pray doesn't, and then when I hate Ramadan leaving, because I'm like, man, I'm kind of all right during Ramadan, and then once Ramadan leaves, it's really hard to hold on to it. But so I'm just this Ramadan, a couple of things. Number one, if I'm praying or doing dhikr, is the only time I'm safe from my mouth. You see, I talk a lot. It's the only time I'm safe from my own mouth. Imam al-Ghazali says that like anything I don't say, I'm the master of the things I don't say. The things I say are the master of me. We got to account for everything that we say. And like as somebody that just talks incessantly, it's like, it's really dangerous. There's going to be a lot of things that I don't even remember saying, and we just pray Allah's merciful, and you know. So I'm like, man, so like I like to do the 2-hour Taraweeh. I don't do it every day, but I really like the 2-hour Taraweeh. And I'm like, man, for 2 hours, I'm in Salat. I'm probably not messing up. It's the only time that I'm only safe from myself. You know what I mean? If I'm doing dhikr, reading the Quran, or in Salat. Yeah. Any other time, it's like, man, I'm in danger of myself. Yeah. And then also that the ego is an enemy. Like the ego is not like just, yeah, the ego's a trip. No, the ego is our worst enemy. And any venom we have for any colonizer, oppressor, bad person, abuser, whatever, it's nothing. None of that is going to harm me and the people I love like my own ego is.
And are you somebody that likes to be around people, or do you for your own company?
Both.
A bit mixed.
I really love both.
Okay.
Yeah. But then there are some people that being with them is almost as good. It's like almost like being alone, because I just vibe with them so much. Yeah. That's when I say Amir Suleiman and Yassine Bey. Yeah.
And do you, during these most difficult times in your life, what's kind of got you through?
Just God, just Allah. Because it's like, man, at the end, the worst thing that can happen in the dunya is you die and then you go be with God. And Allah will eventually forgive us. You know what I mean? I have a lot to be forgiven for. But Allah says, I am in the opinion of my slave. So, and then like there's this story where forgive me, I can't remember if it's a hadith or just something one of our teachers told us. And so the Salafis would be like, see, brother, we know the difference between, oh, you're right. You're right about that. You get that one for this guy, for this Jahili guy. But my teachers know which one is which. Yeah. But in any case, it's two guys that were major sinners, and they go before Allah, and Allah says, you guys have to go to the fire. And so they accept their fate, and they turn around, and they're walking towards the fire, and one of them turns back around and like stops, and Allah says, well, why did you stop? He said, because I thought you were going to forgive me. And he's like, you're forgiven. Yeah. So
you have a good opinion of Allah.
Yeah, I believe that Allah is going to, if not already, I really believe that Allah forgives us. Yeah. I believe it's such a core tenet of the relationship between the creator and the creation, for the human beings in particular. It's like, that's the secret of it all. You know what I mean? I'm going to create a Khalifa in the earth. Why would you do that? That's going to be a problem, because I know what you don't know.
And what do you, I mean, you've done a lot in your life, you know, a lot of experiences, and in many ways, in many areas, you've been successful in what you've done. What do you think you've had to sacrifice to achieve what you have achieved?
It's all fake. Like anything that I missed out on is fake anyway. Like, you miss out on security and belonging, you know what I mean? Like, you belong to society, and you can, like, what is that? That doesn't mean anything. Like, especially once you, you know what I mean? Like, in 2020, I was completely broke. Like, not just, like, some rich people would be like, oh, I filed bankruptcy. You still had millions of dollars, and you still, I mean, like, we came to this country, like, every month, like, we would pay our rent and just be like, don't know how we're doing it next month. You know what I mean? And then got canceled. So it's like, man, acceptance and security and all those things. It's like, you sacrifice delusions. They're like, I don't envy them. I don't envy those delusions. You know what I mean? Like, you see people, like, a lot of people is like, okay, so I've never seen it as bad as what's happening in Palestine right now. But I've always known this is what white supremacy is, and this is what colonialism is. I've known it my whole life. I've heard these stories, like, people say this is the first time, and Dr. Bilal, Dr. Ware, Dr. Rudolph Ware, Bilal Ware. Okay. You should have him on your show. That'd be really dope. Okay. I should have him on mine too. But he wrote the Walking Quran. I just saw, and I was thinking this, and then he said it. But he said, you know, people are saying this is the first time we've seen this kind of treatment and genocide and everything. He was like, that is not true. In America, just 2 generations before us, they would have big parties where they lynched and castrated and burned Black boys and men, and sometimes women, and they would take photos of it. They would, I mean, sorry, this is rough stuff, but it's real. They would cut their body parts off and keep them as souvenirs, and they would give them to each other as gifts, and they would make postcards out of their bodies, and they sent postcards to their friends, like, for Christmas. You know what I mean? So, like, this is not the first time that this has been seen. And, like, all these things that are happening, I heard directly from Native and First Nations elders that this is what happened to them. And then I went to Australia and heard the same stories. You know what I mean? Everywhere that this end of times thing called whiteness has, everywhere it goes, this is what it does. That's why, like, this is not anti-Semitic. I'm not anti-Semitic. I am anti-white supremacy. What's happening there has nothing to do with Judaism. Has everything to do with white supremacist colonialism. You know. Yeah.
So I guess you've been speaking out on this as well, and you've always, you know, been an activist in many of these campaigns. What would you like your legacy to be? How would you like to be remembered? Man, I just see that Yasin is somebody that whenever you see him, you remember God. Even if you don't believe in God, you're like, that guy believes in God. You know what I mean? That would be good. Yeah, and Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X, and, like, you know, people connect with them that aren't Muslim. Yeah. You know what I mean? But Cornel West is the same way. You know, and that's what I'm saying. Like, there are people from other traditions that are like that too. And if you met a younger Ali in his maybe 20s.
Mhm.
What advice would you give him?
Nothing.
What would you say to him?
Nothing. I wouldn't say anything because you gotta, you know what I mean?
Why not?
Because the like learning it all is the good part. And if you don't taste it, then that's what makes it real. Like you hear about like you read stories about these like saintly people, like the awliya in Islam, but it's like, you know, they are that because they felt it, like they tasted it, they experienced it. Like one person can be a scholar and they learn everything and they can tell you everything, but it just doesn't land at all, you know. But somebody else actually, like, you know, Imam Ghazali and Rumi, like they both taught for a long time. They were famous for it. But then at some point they realized, like, I'm not living what I teach yet. So they both had that moment, and then they leave, and then that's when people are just like, that's when they transform the world. Yeah.
And as we come to the end of the interview, so on a more lighthearted note, I mean, how do you relax? What makes you happy? You know, what are you doing when you're not kind of dealing with
just stupid
day-to-day
stuff like everybody else, scrolling and just stupid things.
Is that your downtime?
I like, yeah, it's the things where like I'm able to lie to myself. You know what I mean? Because I'm like, oh, I do my business on social media. Because like the media, especially right now, the media is not dealing with me at all. This is the first interview I've had in a long time. Yeah, with you. I mean, I hired a publicist. I paid a lot of money to a publicist, and they didn't get me one interview. And I don't have one festival booked this summer. And it's one thing for your career. My career's had a lot of highs and lows. So it's one thing to be like, this year you're on Coachella and Glastonbury, and then next year you're on like some local tiny festival. But it's one thing to go to like zero, none. It means that you're outspoken for Palestine, and a lot of people in this industry don't like that. And even the people that don't care, or they might care about the Palestinians, but they're not outspoken. It's like, it's way easier. We don't have to ask. If we invite you, we have to answer a lot of questions. If we don't invite you, we can invite everybody else. So,
do you think are you also quite hard on yourself a lot of the times?
I used to be a lot more than I am now.
Or are you quite forgiving of yourself?
But I'm just honest. You know what I mean? I'm just honest. So it's like, that's just the first step in like just being honest. So like, I lie to myself. I tell myself that like, well, I have to. Social media is the only outlet I have right now, so I have to be on there. But I could realistically do that in an hour a day tops. Like, why would you need to do that more than an hour a day? Okay. Yeah.
And talking about your future projects, because you are very busy at the moment. You've released some new tracks and sharing your thoughts and stories behind that. So tell us about your recent kind of releases and what the future holds, and where's the direction of travel for Ali? Yeah, so we're unveiling an album now slowly over time called Love and Service. And I made this all with one producer. His name is Justin, and for a long time he went by Unjust. And now he's slowly changing it to being Just. And Yasin actually was like, you have to tell him to change his name. Like he was like, oh my God. Basically what Imam Muhammad said to me, he's like, this dude is so beautiful. Like he's all about justice. Why does he call himself Unjust? But he's got a story behind it and everything. But so he is a producer. He's an animator, illustrator. He is also an anti-Zionist Jewish brother, and he's also an ad executive at one of the biggest advertising agencies. He's a vice president at one of the biggest advertising agencies. And we just put out this song and video called The Collapse, which is about Palestine and the collapse of colonialism and imperialism and stuff. And he told me, I said, man, aren't you excited to put this video out? He was like, there's a 50-50 chance I lose my job by the end of the month once we drop this song. Because you said, I think when you put it out, you said catch it before it gets taken down. Or
it
becomes harder to view it.
So this is the new way. They don't pull it down and they don't tell you can't do that, but they just really restrict
the algorithms and stuff.
Yeah. So a really good friend of mine who's a very, very serious journalist I just reached out to him and I was like, man, I'm on 0 festivals. I got 0 media outlets, even though I hired a high-powered publicist to help. You know, on YouTube, on Facebook, I got 300,000 followers. I post something and get 1 comment. 200 people see it. You know, YouTube is 30,000, 32,000 subscribers. I put a video out, a new music video, and like 2,000 people see it, you know. And he looked at my stuff and he's like, oh, you're shadow banned. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That's what it is. They gaslight you. So it's not like the days of Paul Robeson and Nina Simone and those people where they would, you know, take your passport away or put you in prison or something. Mm-hmm. Like now everybody slowly just takes the spotlight off you until this issue is over. And then, you know, once people aren't talking about Palestine anymore, we'll always be talking. Yeah. I've always have talked about it, always will.
And for people that aren't familiar with your work, so maybe some of our listeners that don't know, what would you say is, where should they start off with the tracks that you've released in the past? What's the pecking order? Did you say that if nobody knows Brother Ali, I want to get introduced to his work?
It depends on who they are. Right. It depends on who they are.
Okay, good.
And what they listen to. So being that this is a Muslim podcast, if somebody listens to anything before 2017, they're going to hear a lot of cursing. Okay. That's just what it is.
Okay.
It's going to be what Imam Muhammad said. These are beautiful ideas, but the language isn't beautiful. And outside of the context of when, where, and who that music was made with, it might just sound like any other rap music, you know? But for Muslims, I made an album in 2017 called All the Beauty in This Whole Life. And that was really inspired by the Islamic tradition and things like that. And that's a clean album, and you know, so that one could be nice for people. If somebody is just like a diehard hip hop fan, I would say probably my first album, Shadows on the Sun, was like a classic early 2000s hip hop record. Like you could play that next to like a Jay-Z record and you would hear the similarities, but you'd also hear what I'm doing differently. If somebody is a fan of like songwriting, then I would say I have 2 albums that came out back to back, Undisputed Truth and the Us album. Those, I think I was really like learning how to really write songs, autobiographical songwriting. If somebody is an activist and that's their thing, I have one called Morning in America. That would be the one for that.
So different things for different audiences.
Yeah. But they're all combined. So the spiritual, the autobiographical, the high level rapping, the political, there's some of all of it in every album.
What are the kind of top...
different ones focus on different things.
What are the top 2 or 3 tracks that you're most known for?
So the 2, like if you go to Spotify, it's going to be a song called Forrest Whitaker, which is about being albino. And then Uncle Sam Goddamn is about the empire and America. Yeah.
Okay. And how can people support your work? If many people listeners are out there, you've not asked me to say this.
No, yeah.
But if people want to support you and people want to kind of follow you and, you know, keep up to date with your work, how could they do that?
Thank you for asking that. The best, most direct way is to go to brotherali.com and sign the mailing list so that we don't have to wait for social media. And to when we release stuff, so like the Love and Service album is doing a pre-order now. To buy the stuff from us that we're releasing. That's the best way to support any independent artist. If somebody is on a record label, there's no way to support them directly. It doesn't exist. If you buy their music, the record label gets paid first, and they may never see a dime. They most likely will never see any of that money that you spend. If you stream our music, we get fraction of a penny. You know, Snoop Dogg gets $40,000 a year from streaming for billions of streams. Yeah. I mean, just millions and millions and millions. He makes $40,000 a year from streaming. Somebody like me, I put a project out, it'll get 1 million streams and I'll make $3,000. Like it's nothing. They just rob us. But that being said, it also does help to spread the word. It helps to listen to the podcast, to listen to the music. It helps to like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. I mean, you know, we always say, like, if you're not going to actually, you know, if you're not going to actually buy the stuff, the art that we make, like, you can get it for free if you want. Yeah. But if you choose to buy it, you really help the artist when it's independent. And
through your website, if they wanted to kind of donate to you apart from buying your stuff or support, you know, the project,
all of that stuff. Yeah, the music that I released on my former record label. So I was part of a record label for 20 years. And when I left Minneapolis, I also departed from that. So even those, they still control those albums, but they sell them to me wholesale so that I can sell them retail. And then also they actually do pay. Rhymesayers was the record label. They actually do pay royalties. Okay. Yeah. Fine. And they're owned by a Muslim, or they're operated by a Muslim brother, and he's not a liar. He's not a shyster. He pays you what he says he's going to pay you.
Sure. And you mainly, obviously, you've got your Travelers podcast as well, which is definitely one to follow. And are you mainly on Instagram, or is it kind of like what platforms?
That's the only one where I get any engagement.
You use Instagram?
Yeah, so Instagram that's and
YouTube,
probably the best one.
Get your stuff. Okay. So, Brother Ali, Jazakallah khair for your time. Thank you so much.
And again, I'm so sorry for being late.
No problem. Is there any final message you'd like to give to anyone listening?
Just thank you, and if I said anything offensive, then just be better than me and forgive me.
Okay. Well, we wish you all the best. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to, you know, give you the steadfastness and put barakah in your work.
Ameen.
Make you keep going and being an advocate for, you know, getting that message out there and support you and the family and I guess being a role model for other people as well. And I was particularly touched by, you know, one of the podcasts where how you've kind of built a relationship with some of your fans, and was it From Fan to Friend? Was it?
Oh yeah,
listen to that one. That
Dan Chisholm.
Very powerful in terms of how you've kind of, you know, you're very humble, enjoying the journey with people that are listening to you.
I'm sorry, but he's an example that if somebody that listens to us is interested in becoming Muslim, like, that's a good way to get a lot of my personal time. Like, if somebody is sincere and they really want to do that, like,
reach out to you.
Yes, yeah. You hit me on social media. We start there, and then we usually move it to WhatsApp.
Yeah.
And
so if people haven't heard that episode, I'd definitely encourage it. It's how you supported him and built a friendship, and he became a Muslim, and you kind of, you know, he was interviewing you, which is fascinating. So no, if people are looking for that kind of, to reach out and get,
that's what I'd love to do
guidance,
more than
you're open
anything.
to that, yeah.
Yes, exactly. if I, like, I have to make music because it's who I am, but like, if the thing that I love doing more than anything else is sharing Islam with people, and that's the main thing I miss about living in America. And I want to say about this podcast too, that I really appreciate it. I really appreciate the work that you do and the people that you talk to and the way that you speak to them. And I notice when people bring on Black Muslims specifically and really connect with them and are able to be you're the same person with them that you are with anybody else, you know, and you're just your genuine interest and value for the community that I come from, you know. So the way that you talk to Preacher Moss is the way that I wish people would talk to Preacher Moss, and not everybody does. Yeah. And so, yeah, I'm really grateful.
Thank you, very generous for that. Thank you. Jazakallah khair. Okay, Jazakallah khair. All the best, and hopefully we'll keep in touch, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.